There is a specific type of discomfort that settles over a room when someone says out loud the thing that everyone in that room already knows but has agreed not to discuss. Ricky Gervais has spent the better part of 2 decades engineering exactly that discomfort at some of the most carefully managed events in the entertainment industry. And the 2020 Golden Globe ceremony represented perhaps his most concentrated version of it. What he said from that stage was pointed at the entire structure of an industry that had built its public reputation around progressive values, social conscience, and visible displays of human decency, while operating internally in ways that many people working inside it had long understood to be considerably less admirable. He was not describing any single person. He was describing a system. But the system he was describing was precisely the system that had produced, sustained, and ultimately been undermined by the public collapse of one of daytime television's most carefully constructed brands, and the specific dynamics he named from the Globe's stage mapped almost exactly onto what had been unfolding, largely without mainstream attention, across several years of public statements by the woman who had been saying the same things from a daytime talk show desk. Ricky Gervais had hosted the Golden Globes 4 times before the 2020 appearance, and each hosting engagement had been defined by the same approach, saying things to the room that the room would have preferred not to hear said, particularly from a stage that the industry treated as its own property. His 2020 monologue was the most concentrated version of this approach. He made a reference to Jeffrey Epstein while looking directly at the audience, pausing long enough to let the implication settle. He told the assembled Hollywood figures not to use their acceptance speeches as political platforms because, in his direct assessment, nobody watching at home cared what they thought. He described Apple TV Plus as a company that operated facilities in China under conditions inconsistent with the values its entertainment division publicly celebrated, while pointing at Apple executives in the audience as he said it. He noted, without apparent irony, that he was speaking to the most privileged room in the world and found it remarkable that anyone treated the people in it as moral authorities on anything outside their specific craft. In interviews following the broadcast, Gervais described his criteria for material with characteristic directness. He asked himself whether he would say a given thing to the person's face. He described the gap between the image that Hollywood projected about itself and the reality of how it functioned as something that most people working inside the industry were financially motivated to maintain rather than close. He was not speaking specifically about Ellen DeGeneres. But the gap he was describing, between the projected image and the operational reality, was the precise gap that had been at the center of the most significant reputation collapse in daytime television history. Ellen DeGeneres launched The Ellen DeGeneres Show in September 2003 and ran it for 19 seasons until May 2022, producing 3,296 episodes across that span. The show won 63 Daytime Emmy Awards during its run and at its commercial peak reached an audience of approximately 4 million viewers per episode in the United States, with international broadcast extending across dozens of countries. Its central identity was built around a single organizing idea: kindness. DeGeneres danced onto the stage every day, the audience danced with her, the show gave away cars and gifts and money to people in financial difficulty, and every episode closed with the same instruction to the audience: be kind to one another. The instruction became a signature. The signature became a brand. The brand became one of the most commercially successful daytime entertainment operations in American television history. DeGeneres was named to Time magazine's list of 100 most influential people multiple times. In 2016, President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The brand's power was not merely commercial. It created a specific kind of social protection. The Be Kind identity was so thoroughly constructed and so consistently projected over so many years that challenging it required a viewer to contradict not just a celebrity persona but something that looked like a fundamental character. To say that Ellen DeGeneres was not kind was to say something that most of her audience found genuinely difficult to process, because the evidence they had accumulated across 19 years of television pointed in the other direction. The people who had been saying something different for years discovered what happens when a claim contradicts a brand that powerful. The claim disappears, and the person making it is left holding it alone. Wendy Williams had been making the claim for years. Williams built her career on a foundational commitment to saying publicly what others in broadcasting had decided was safer to keep private. She started in radio, where she ran one of the most successful and simultaneously controversial talk programs in the history of the format, speaking about celebrities in terms that their publicists and managers found professionally threatening. She was sued, fired from multiple stations, and threatened with legal action repeatedly, and she kept going. When the Wendy Williams show launched on television in 2008, she carried the same approach into daytime, anchoring every episode around a hot topic segment that operated on a simple editorial principle. She would say what she actually thought, without the managed positivity that most daytime television applied to celebrity coverage. Her audience understood what they were getting, and they showed up for it across 14 seasons. The visible tension between Williams and DeGeneres had been documented across 2 appearances Williams made on the Ellen DeGeneres show. During the first, Williams made a prediction about Kim Kardashian that DeGeneres received with visible stiffness. During the second, Williams told DeGeneres, during a game format, that some people thought Justin Bieber resembled her. DeGeneres' on-camera response was controlled but noticeably cool. The 2 women's on-screen chemistry was essentially non-existent in both appearances, and anyone watching with attention could see it. When DeGeneres' show won a People's Choice Award, Williams acknowledged it on her own show in the specific tone that transforms a compliment into something else, congratulating DeGeneres while letting her audience supply the subtext. The moment that broke the wider conversation open arrived in July 2020, when BuzzFeed News published an investigation into the working environment of the Ellen DeGeneres show. The investigation contained accounts from current and former employees describing what they said was a systematically toxic workplace. Former staff members described racial microaggressions directed at employees of color, a culture in which raising concerns was professionally dangerous rather than professionally protected, and sexual misconduct by senior producers. The story was widely published and widely read. Warner Bros. Television, which produced the show, launched an internal investigation. 3 senior executive producers were subsequently removed from their positions. DeGeneres addressed the allegations directly at the beginning of season 18. Speaking to her studio audience, she said she had been disappointed by what she had heard, that she had always tried to create a workplace that was the opposite of what had been described, and that if she had failed to make people feel safe and valued, she was committed to fixing that. She described herself as a good person. In a separate interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she expressed confusion about why the story had emerged and suggested it had been orchestrated, saying she could not understand why it was happening to her. Her framing positioned her as someone responding to an external attack rather than someone accounting for a documented workplace pattern. Wendy Williams watched DeGeneres' on-air response and brought it to her Hot Topics desk. She told her audience directly that she was not buying it and that she was glad everything had finally been exposed. She drew on her own experience of appearing on the Ellen DeGeneres show, saying she had never been happy there, and told her audience that 19 years of a television show does not change who you are, it reveals who you really are. She argued that DeGeneres was not ending the show by choice but because the allegations had left her without a viable path to continue. She described the workplace conditions as something that people in the industry had been aware of for years. It was the most direct and specific public statement Williams had made about her own experience as a guest on that show, and it carried the particular credibility of someone who had been in the building and was now describing what she had found there. And Hetchy's account occupied a completely different level of proximity. Hetchy met DeGeneres at a Vanity Fair Oscar party in 1997. She was 28 years old, an actress whose career was considered one of the most promising in Hollywood at that point, having appeared in Donnie Brasco, Wag the Dog, and 6 Days, 7 Nights, among other productions. DeGeneres was 39. Within days of their meeting, they were in a relationship that both women later described as immediate and intense in ways neither had previously experienced. The relationship was significant in American cultural history because of when it happened and who they were. In 1997, a same-sex relationship conducted openly between 2 public figures at their level of celebrity was genuinely unusual, and The Advocate described them as the first gay super couple. They attended public events together, appeared on magazine covers, and conducted their relationship in the kind of full public view that most celebrities of that era reserved for heterosexual partnerships. The relationship ended in 2000. What Hetchy said about what it had cost her was recorded in a 2021 podcast episode of Better Together with Hetchy and Heather Duffy Boylston. In that recording, Hetchy and her co-host discussed what had been learned as people came forward with information about how her career had been affected following the relationship's end. Hetchy confirmed that DeGeneres had, according to her account, communicated to networks and studios that professional access to the Ellen DeGeneres show's promotional platform would not be available to projects that featured Hetchy. Hetchy described this as an implicit professional threat that she had not fully understood while it was happening but had come to understand in retrospect through what others eventually told her. When her co-host asked directly why she had ended the relationship with DeGeneres, Hetchy said it could be reduced to one thing, which was that if kindness and love were her own destination and goal, that was not what she had experienced DeGeneres as orienting toward. She then addressed DeGeneres directly in the recording, speaking as if to her. She hoped DeGeneres liked her money, because that was what Hetchy was describing as the real priority, and she said it was what DeGeneres had wanted then and she hoped she was satisfied with it now. This recording was made in June 2021. It received some coverage in entertainment press when it aired but did not enter the mainstream conversation in any significant way. On August 5, 2022, and Hetchy was driving in the Mar Vista neighborhood of Los Angeles when her vehicle left the road at high speed and struck a residential structure, which caught fire. She was pulled from the wreckage and taken to hospital with severe burns and injuries. She died on August 12, 2022, at the age of 53. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner coroner ruled her death an accident. In the days following her death, the 2021 podcast recordings began circulating extensively on social media, reaching audiences that had never encountered them during her lifetime. The combination of what Hetchy had said and the fact that she was no longer alive to say anything further gave the recordings a weight and a reach they had not had when she was alive. DeGeneres was photographed leaving a restaurant in Santa Barbara while Hetchy remained in hospital. When a reporter approached her and asked whether she had been in contact with Hetchy, DeGeneres said they were not in touch and she would not know. After Hetchy's death was confirmed, DeGeneres posted on Twitter that it was a sad day and that she was sending Hetchy's children, family, and friends all of her love. Neither statement addressed the substance of what Hetchy had said about the relationship or about the professional consequences she had described. The Ellen DeGeneres show ended in May 2022, in its 19th season. DeGeneres had announced the ending several months earlier, in May 2021. In subsequent interviews, she indicated that she had made the decision to end the show before the 2020 workplace allegations became public, but that the aftermath of those allegations had changed her relationship with the show. She said that for the first time in her career she had been the target of sustained negative media coverage and that it had affected her. The show's finale in late May 2022 drew an audience considerably smaller than its peak years. What the full arc of this story illustrates, when assembled from its documented components, is something that Ricky Gervais was describing in structural terms from the Globe stage in 2020. He was not describing Ellen DeGeneres specifically. He was describing the gap between the image that Hollywood's most prominent figures project about themselves and the reality of how they operate. And he was describing the financial incentives that sustain that gap rather than closing it. The Be Kind brand was commercially essential. It created the audience trust that made the advertising revenue possible. It positioned DeGeneres as a moral presence rather than a purely commercial one. The distance between that positioning and what former employees described in 2020, and what Hetchy described in 2021, is precisely the kind of distance that Gervais was pointing at without pointing at anyone in particular. Wendy Williams, by the time the full scale of the DeGeneres story had become clear, was facing a crisis of her own that had nothing to do with DeGeneres, and that was considerably more severe than anything she had been describing from her Hot Topics desk. In September 2021, she went on an extended hiatus from her show due to complications from Graves' disease, the autoimmune thyroid condition she had been managing since at least 2018. She had previously experienced a brief collapse on her own set during a 2017 Halloween episode, catching herself before falling and continuing the broadcast, an incident that generated significant coverage at the time. The 2021 hiatus became indefinite. Her show continued with rotating guest hosts. She never returned to it. The Wendy Williams show officially concluded in June 2022 after 14 seasons. A documentary about her life, Where is Wendy Williams?, released in 2023, documented the extent to which her health had deteriorated and revealed that she had been placed under a court-ordered guardianship. In April 2024, her care team publicly confirmed that she had been diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia and frontotemporal dementia, a progressive neurological condition affecting language, behavior, and cognitive function. A longtime friend and publicist stated publicly in 2024 that the guardianship had significantly limited Williams's access to people who cared about her, and that there were serious unresolved concerns about how her affairs were being managed and in whose interest. The woman who had spent 14 seasons of television telling her audience things that powerful people in the entertainment industry preferred not to have said publicly, who had stood at her own desk and described her experience on Ellen DeGeneres' show and told her audience directly that she had not been happy there, was by 2024 in a care facility, under a guardianship that controlled her access to the world, her finances, and her ability to communicate publicly. The voice that had been the loudest and most specific in daytime television for over a decade had gone quiet, not through any decision of its own but through the cumulative effect of a progressive illness and the legal structures that had assembled around her in its wake. What connects Ricky Gervais's observations from the Golden Globe stage, Wendy Williams's sustained and specific commentary from her daytime desk, and Hetchy's recorded account of what the relationship had cost her, is not a conspiracy or a coordinated effort. It is three people in very different positions describing the same structural reality from different angles and with different levels of personal exposure to it. Gervais described the system from outside. Williams described a specific example from the adjacent professional space. Hetchy described the interior of the relationship at the center of it. None of them said the same things in the same words. All of them were describing the same gap between what was projected and what was real, and all of them paid some cost for describing it, in different currencies and at different scales.